All right, the purpose of this presentation is to talk about cognitive apprenticeships and how you can make use of the idea of cognitive apprenticeships in a variety of different educational contexts. There's some pictures here of the people who are sort of the conceptualizers of the idea of cognitive apprenticeship. John Seely Brown and Alan Collins are two of them. This is actually a picture up here that they had in one of their original articles with Paul Duguid showing a master and the master's apprentices working on a weaving kind of a model. But they spent a lot of time talking about how cognitive apprenticeships differ from traditional apprenticeships. So let's talk about them. All right, the first thing I want to do is that there is this cliche that has become quite popular within the educational sector, and that is that the change within the schools that we want to see happen is to have teachers move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. So that's the cliche, and so I try to depict that visually here with someone delivering a lecture versus someone's being right on next to the learner as they're working with something. Now I'm depicting the child here. Obviously you can be doing cognitive apprenticeships with adult learners as well. But the principal point is that cognitive apprenticeships gives us some specific things about what it means to be that guide on the side, and probably the worst form of cognitive apprenticeships as it's been applied is that you stop being the director of instruction, the center of instruction, to not doing anything with instruction, and so that's kind of the thing that you don't want to have happen. The guide on the side is a very active participant in the learning process. You don't sit at your desk and grade papers. You're engaged in the learning process much more actively. But the student becomes the center. Okay, so this is really a theory for helping us. Most of us have experienced a very teacher-centric model of learning, and this theory really helps us to get a grip on what it means to move to the guide on the side. What is it that I have to do as that guide? The basis of this theory is something called situated cognition. Learning must be in the context that it will be used, is the principal idea of situated cognition. And almost every element of the cognitive apprenticeship model is trying to make the internal thought processes external. That's pretty much the goal in cognitive apprenticeships, is to take what we have inside our brain and get it outside. And in this little image here, it's sort of vocalizing it. You're getting what's going on, the gears that are turning inside by talking about what's going on. Okay. All right. So the methods of cognitive apprenticeships include modeling, coaching and scaffolding with fading, articulation and reflection, and exploration. And there's a nice visual within the cognitive apprenticeships chapter that kind of shows how all these things fit together. And really, modeling is something that occurs at the very beginning of the process. Coaching and scaffolding, there's a lot of coaching and scaffolding after the modeling process, but as the learners are engaged in whatever whole task that they're engaged with. So you need to provide a lot more coaching and scaffolding at the initial stages of learning. And then as you move forward, there's a lot more time for articulation and reflection, and exploration kind of happens all along the way. And then somewhere as a concluding experience, you have an event where the articulation becomes an activity for reflection. Okay, so that's kind of showing you that, and really it's kind of like time. It's like a timeline going from left to right, from modeling to the conclusive articulation and reflection event. All right, modeling. Modeling is all about making the internal external. So a lot of people who adopt modeling, they just say, oh, well, I've delivered lectures lots, and so I'll just deliver a lecture and call it modeling. But that's not really what modeling is. modeling is very teacher-centric in nature. It really is you as the expert of whatever domain you are an expert of, providing a model for the learner, but it's more than that. It's really taking your thought processes and talking about your thought process, the thought processes you've gone through as you work to solving a problem or design whatever you're designing, or whatever the activity it is that you want the learners to engage in. You want to help them understand how you've gone through that, how you go through that. What are the internal cognitions that you go through to solve problems or whatever it is. All this modeling also needs to include a little bit of what I call Zen of problem solving. One of the more influential books I've ever read is The Zen of Motorcycle Maintenance. And a lot of what happens when you're solving problems, whether the problem is how to repair a motorcycle, or if the problem is a math problem, or if the problem is a social problem, or whatever the problem is, often, if it's really a problem, it's something that your first reaction to it is, oh my, I don't know what to do. And so if you know immediately how to proceed, then it's really not a problem. It's only a problem if it's overwhelming. I mean, you just really aren't sure where to begin. And so what happens is you can get very frustrated. The more frustrated you get, the less you're able to actually think about it. And so a lot of what I do with problem solving, and this is particularly true in the problem solving domain, is to talk about how you need to step away from the problem. So I include that in my modeling strategy. So it's not just, okay, here's the problem given, and here's how I proceed to the end. It has to include, well, here's where I was proceeding, and I realized that wasn't going to work. I was getting frustrated. I walked away, and when I came back, I was able to look at it from a new perspective, and then I went in this direction with the solution. So it needs to have all that messiness in the modeling process. Can be in process, or it can be a retroactive protocol of a completed artifact. So you can pose a problem that you have not ever solved before and solve it live in front of a group of learners. Or the other thing that you could do is you can talk about a problem that you have solved, but go back and talk about all those false trails that you went down, all those frustrating points, all those decisions you made that weren't necessarily good decisions, and why they weren't good decisions, and how you would change that as you move forward, so that they have entree into your thought processes. So that's modeling. It's not delivering a lecture. It's much more than that. Okay. Coaching and scaffolding, I've come to kind of equate them. The idea of scaffolding with fading is really, at its heart, the Godskin, is that you want to give just the right amount of scaffolding, just the right amount of support, not too much, so that you're taking away the control, and not too little that their frustration level's getting too high. You need to be there to help. You've got to be, if you've got a group of learners engaged in something, let's say you have a whole class of learners, you have 30 people who are learning, whether they're children or adults, and you've broken them up into 5 groups of 6. Well, the 6 people that are working on that problem, you need to get in there and get involved in it and engaged in that problem-solving process, to be there to help them as they're struggling with it. And only give just the right amount of help, not too much help. I mean, you're the expert in whatever it is. You could easily get them moving in the direction of a solution, but you just need to get them to overcome whatever obstacle they're immediately facing. Just the right, and really there's no hard and fast rule in that. It's you need to kind of decide that for yourself. It's an art, not a science. The other thing is, this is a principal idea of a Vygotsky approach, and that is, you need to have a whole task. You don't want to break it down into the components. I used to be a math teacher. I spent a lot of time teaching kids how to factor. Well, you can spend months on factoring, and kids lose track of why is it that we're learning factoring. Well, you're learning factoring so you can solve quadratic equations. Well, why are we solving quadratic equations? Well, because there are certain phenomena in the world that can be represented in a quadratic equation, and if it can be represented in a quadratic equation, solving that quadratic equation can solve that real-world phenomena problem. And so most people don't get that. They've gone through algebra in high school and they have no clue that's why they were learning factoring. So you don't want to be engaged in some kind of component skill. You want to give them a real problem and let them work on that real problem. Now, and then you help them along the way. And if the solution of the problem requires factoring, then you talk about factoring at that point. Okay. Articulation and reflection. Really, one of the things that you could do is you really need to have them capture their own thought processes in some way. You could if this is some kind of problem solving that's lasting for several. If it's a class type learning environment and it's lasting for 10 class periods, let's say, then you might want to stop somewhere in the middle and get them to talk about the things that they've done and get them to enter into conversations about the processes that they've gone through at that point, to just get them out there on the table. And it really is that articulation activity that allows them to then be able to reflect on the process that they're going through. So it's this. They often talk about articulation as a separate method within the cognitive apprenticeships, and reflection as a separate method, and yet I don't think they're so closely tied that I don't know how you can separate them. You really need to engage in the articulation, and the reason you're engaging in that articulation is for the purpose of getting what's internal in your thought processes external, so that you can then engage in a reflective activity. Okay. And of course, all of this cognitive apprenticeship activity has to be immersed in some sort of exploration activity. So it's a design guideline. It's not really a method. So again, problem solving often is an exploration kind of activity. Again, if it's a problem that's complex enough, then it will last some, for at least several hours, maybe over a period of several days, and so that's really an exploratory kind of model. Okay. All right. Just to summarize, we have modeling, and modeling really usually happens at the beginning to give them a framework for understanding what it is that they're engaged in. You then get them involved in whatever activity that you're going to have them engage in. It could be a project, it could be a problem, but in the book we talk about project-based learning and problem-based learning. You ought to think about those two as the principal alternatives for this exploratory kind of environment. But whether they're working on a project or solving a problem, at the beginning of whatever they're doing, that's where the scaffolding and coaching needs to be a lot more frequent. And then later, as they're getting closer to the solution or to the completion of the project, is where articulation and reflection kind of kick in. Okay, so that's cognitive apprenticeships. I hope that helps clarify things for you. And if not, you're welcome to ask me further questions via email, or you're welcome to read the chapter. The chapter is pretty well written. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.